And now, from beyond our dimension, this is the JeffMara podcast. Here's Jeff.
My guest is Matthew Mournian, professional psychic and energy worker that specializes in the removal of entity attachments, astral parasites, psychic attacks, and more. He had a sudden walk-in activation event in 2015 that changed his entire life and began getting taken out of his body and eventually was greeted by a couple of Mantis ETs amongst a number of strange events. Matthew, thanks for joining me and welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here.
Well, it's my honor to have you. And if you don't mind, let's start with your 2015 event. What happened?
First off, I always say this whenever I do these. I practice a very particular type of telepathic communication. And I say this every time I do a show. For those that watch, you can just look at the left eye and you will receive an internal version, like a slideshow, like a visual display of what I'm talking about. So now that I've said that strange thing, I was working at the time as a mental health counselor and kind of like a group therapy person with veterans at the time in early, like the mid 2000s. And I was actually at a homeless outreach fair in San Diego, California. And I was just doing my thing out there. It was about 90, Fahrenheit in the afternoon. I was completely dehydrated. I was what I would call a completely medicated human mind slave. I had been on everything, imagine it. But I was just in a very toxic stage of my life, and I was walking through this field, getting ready to do my work, and there was these older women there doing energy work, and I didn't know what energy work was at the time. I had no idea what any of that was, and really my only mission that day was to get out of the sun. And as I walked through this huge crowd, this woman came over and was like, "How would you like an energy blessing?" And I remember looking at her and I was, just sweating, like completely toxic. I had literally 50 pounds more weight on my body than I do now. And I remember looking at this woman like, "Can I sit down over there?" And she was like, "Yeah." And I went and sat down under this tent. And this little lady put her hands over my head and just kind of sat there for about, I don't know, it could have been 30 seconds. It could have been 5 minutes. And in that moment, I remember in looking back, it was like I felt this breath of wind sort of leaving the top of my head, which sounds crazy. People that hear that, they're like, "What? You were breathing out of the top of your head?" It was like I felt a breath of wind come out of the top of my head. And after a few moments, I stood up. I walked away. I went back to work. And I remember walking over to this fence and I could see the whole city kind of overlooking everything. And as I looked up into the sky, I could see what looked like sparks of light around me. And it was crazy because for some reason I was able to open my eyes all the way and actually look at the sky, which was a very rare thing for me at that stage. Believe it or not, I had extreme light sensitivity. And that was the first moment in which I noticed like something really weird just happened. And I remember asking the people at my work, I was, walking around asking them like, do I seem okay? I feel like there's air coming out of the top of my head. And I remember people looking at me like, "Really? Yeah, man. Yeah, man, you're fine." And so within 2 days of that moment, I began to get taken out of my body. And I think the very first moment in which I noticed something crazy was happening was probably 48 hours after that. As I woke up, probably about 5 a.m. in the morning, I watched myself drifting through a shimmering blue green kind of watery portal in my bedroom ceiling. And I could see my body laying down on the bed, and I could watch myself entering it, going down slower and slower into it. That continued for about 2 to 3 days. And within that period, in that sort of waking to sleeping moment, I began to meet a series of beings that I think led to this fundamental change in my energy system, in my life. I mean, literally, they changed the course of my entire life. And so I'll cut out a bunch of stuff and then I'll pause there. But it took me about 2 years to sort of normalize everything that had happened in those early stages. And for those looking for a definition of what I'm talking about, after 7 years, I've come to understand that I had a very, very extreme Kundalini activation or even a walk in experience. Because what I noticed was from that moment, every single thing about me changed. I started losing weight. I started to change in ways that right now won't really make any sense. My life began to go in a different direction. And at the culmination of that 2 years, I had an experience where I chose to walk away from my marriage at the time, the house that I owned, the career that I had had. Every single thing in my life I put on the curb in front of my house and, out there, and I drove away. And that was literally the start of my, if you want to call it role timeline, the version of myself that you see here. And so, just to sum it up, I was a product of an extremely, extremely crazy Kundalini awakening and walk-in experience. And I guess now I'll pause right here. That's really the only thing I do is help work with other people on helping to understand and open those things up. And so that's the super fast version of it.
All right. Before we move on, I want to unpack this a little bit. First of all, did you have any interest in any of this supernatural or paranormal stuff before this happened?
That's such a smart question. Honestly, I was like a lot of people at that stage. In 2015, I was very much in the ancient aliens, nuts and bolts, UFO, like Roswell, like I was in that stage, which some of us would call, early stage understanding of the phenomenon of what was going on. I was, however, a part of a family that had been subjected to, I believe, to be extraterrestrial involvement from a very early stage. And my maternal grandfather actually worked for Los Alamos National Laboratories in the mid 1970s. However, he didn't work on anything top secret. He didn't work on any space stuff, supposedly. He actually was working on a quote unquote space age adhesive glue that they were using to glue together aircraft parts. And his job required him to travel from California to New Mexico for these long periods where he would be gone for like 10 days or more. And as he would be coming back from those experiences, he, described a bunch of very strange things happening, beings taking him, missing time, the whole laundry list of everything. And so I guess we could say I was conditioned by that early on within my family, but like a lot of people, it was like a laughing stock. It was just a story that, they would tell. But for me, what I came to understand later on was that there's usually a DNA marker that skips generations in families. So, I was the next generation, that got skipped after that. And so I think something came up in me, but as far as I can tell, it was something that was occurring for me from a very, very early stage. Because, like a lot of people, probably a lot of people that watch your show, I was having some form of a contact experience from a very, very early stage in my life. However, there was no one around me that was equipped to explain, hey, maybe this is a supernatural thing. Maybe this is something other than that. It was just, like I was totally uh, Generation X. And like at that stage, it was like, oh, yeah, you're just having problems. That's all it is, you know what I mean? But yeah, I mean, long story short, I was interested in a lot of that, but I was still very, very stuck in the humanness of it, I guess we could say.
You mentioned that you were taken out of your body. Who was taking you?
That's a very, very good question. I've done a lot of work on putting that together, all the way through QHHT, through my own understandings and through my own experiences and putting it back together. And as far as I can tell, there has been a very large list of, if you want to call them soul family beings that have been, connected to me through many lifetimes, if you want to call it that. And also, I mean, things from what we might call a military perspective, which I won't get too specific on unless we want to go there. And so at this stage of the journey, I am 48 years old, and I think that I have had a contact experience with a number of different types of beings, everything from military to flesh and blood, literal living reptilians that I actually put my hand out and physically touched. So it was like, I know that there was a physical interaction that took place there. And so for me, I think it was kind of a contract that I think that I came into this life with, where there was going to be a series of bizarre events that took place. It's cool now to be able to look at it and go, oh, I realized that was the reason why. Because I know there's a lot of people that walk around that never get to understand, any of the reasons why these things happen. And so, I don't know if that answers your question, but it's been so many, so many at this stage.
One last question before we move on. Is the being that walked in another multi-dimensional version of yourself or a completely other being?
That's a smart question. What I've observed is that in some cases an individual will have a very tangible second identity that will come in. I think that the walk-in experience for those of us that are human is so widely varied and comes with so many different ins and outs and little caveats into how it goes that I think it's different based on the individual. I can tell you that in my case it seems as though another version of myself, and if you want to get really particular and technical, and I know this is cringeworthy for some that will see it, when I look back on that part of my life, it was very much as if a future version of me seemed to walk into this body, because it's as if I was suddenly accelerated on such a rapid level that it was like I sped through like years and years of changes and things. And it was very traumatic. I will say that. I was not the cool, charismatic, sexy version of the awakening being. I was literally crying every day in a ball in my backyard, trying to figure things out. And so I might be branching off from, the original meaning of your question, but for me, the walk-in experience has been less about understanding another identity that enters the body and more about understanding the many aspects of self that we become and that we work with and that we work through in this human journey. So maybe that doesn't answer the question at all. I would like to think maybe it's both. You know what I mean? I can tell you one thing before I pause, and that was I had a QHHT session about 2 years ago now, and a lot of people got a lot of ideas about how that works. And, there's a lot of really good people that do it, but I've only had it once. And I think it was supposed to be done only one time, because within that experience, what I discovered was that there was a very tangible group of flesh and blood beings that take a very particular interest in a lot of us on Earth right now. And they had been literally drawing and piecing together a destiny plan for me through multiple lifetimes, just so I would get to this point right now on Earth where I was equipped to come on places like this and tell people there's another version of you and there's this other skill. There's a whole other set of, missions and things that you can partake in this life. And so for me, maybe it doesn't matter which version that was. You know what I mean? Another identity or another version of me. And anyway, I'll keep talking at you, but that's kind of how I see it at this stage.
Well, it's interesting that you think that this preparation has been going on for multiple lifetimes, because I was wondering if perhaps pre-birth you made this contract and you are also some other ET being that decided to become a human.
You know, I think that's likely on a number of levels. From the work that I've done over the past few years of kind of tracing back what I would call DNA lineage and the aspects of self that are linked to this body, of which there are many. It's a practice that I engage in with the clients that I work with. And I always say this whenever we're looking at past lives or other lives, take it with a grain of salt, because most people are going to be viewing the lives that they've interacted with you know what I mean, from their perspective. And so what I can say for me that I have encountered is that in many, many recent lifetimes, I have served a similar role as I do now, whether it be in some form an oracle or a teacher or a shaman, or in many cases, like it or not, love it or hate it, had a lot of incarnations in which I was very much the negative side of that. And so what I had learned in this life was that there are certain passageways and opening points within the energetic anatomy that, when carefully opened and cultivated, will allow people to begin to remember or to piece together skills and abilities that they've used in other lifetimes and other realms. And so for me, one of the ways that I ended up becoming a psychic was that I had that valve opened within the energy body, and certain things began to come very naturally for me. And so in my own kind of research and understanding, what I figured out was that this is because I had done this again and again and again and again. And along with that, there's kind of a larger oversoul element, which I think links me and probably a lot of us into a lot of, if you want to call them flesh and blood, extraterrestrial beings and versions of ourselves that inhabit higher dimensional planes that for a lot of us will be, like a mantis being or a reptilian sort of form, or these light beings. There's like a million of them that we talk about it on Earth now. And so anyway, once again, I might be branching off from the original uh, question, though. So,
Well, I don't mind the branching, so don't worry about that.
yeah, thanks.
I wanted to talk to you about the mantis contact, but now that you said that you've had hand-to-hand or physical contact with a reptilian, I want to hear about that too. So
Yeah.
where should we start first?
Let's start with the mantis being, and once again, I'll just say it for anyone out there that wants to get a little internalized slideshow of it. I'll tell you really quick story. This was honestly the first extraterrestrial encounter that I think I ever had in this life that I was allowed to remember and experience in the moment. And so the fun part is this links in with a video that everyone can take part in that creates a hyperoxygenation in your body that can, for some people, enable them to have a similar experience. But in 2016, I was engaging in a lot of Kundalini breath work. I was doing a lot of hyperoxygenation of the body, just kind of opening up energy centers. And I was practicing a meditation called Ananda Mandala. And it's kind of non-denominational. It's an Eastern meditation practice that involves, just breathing. It's really just this person that goes 1, 2 for like 30 minutes, and you go, and you just breathe with it, and she takes you through the chakras. And so one morning I was just sitting there doing that meditation in my little room, and as we got to the crown chakra, this pop occurred. Sorry, that was probably too loud on your mic. And to my left in the corner of the room was a greenish, kind of brown, vibrating, glowing, praying mantis being that was probably, well, not probably, it was bigger than the room itself, which is hard to conceptualize when you're like, there's something in the room with me that's larger than the room. But after, 8 or 9 years of this, I can only still say it was larger than the room we were in. And it was sitting in the corner across from me. And all I could do was look at it. And tears streamed down my eyes, and I just shook and looked at this being for maybe a few seconds. And, in the mind's eye, you ask, what is this? What's happening? Who are you? What is this? And in that moment, it switched and it turned into a small boy. But I would imagine like an Indian or an Eastern looking boy. He had kind of like longish black hair, and he was wearing red bands around his arms, and he was sitting in the same position as this mantis being, kind of just folded up like this, looking at me. And he was just smiling, just smiling. And it sounds crazy, but the feeling I got from them was that they were proud of me. It was just like this absolute pride and love. And boom, snap, they were gone. 2 weeks later, I was doing a group meditation. We're doing the same exact meditation, and people can look it up on YouTube. I mean, it's very, normal. It's nothing too crazy, you know what I mean? But I was doing that same meditation with a group of people, and I had another encounter with another one, and this time also to my left. And it was this sort of sandy brown, kind of dusty looking mantis being. This one was much more varied and much more present. And as I questioned it with my mind, I was, we do that thing. And I think this happens for most people that encounter a true multidimensional entity, if you want to call it that. It's like there's so many questions, and there's so many frequencies of energy that are activated in your body at that moment that it's nearly impossible to keep your mind focused on it. But as I began asking, what is this? Who are you? It was like this being had a personality, I guess we could say. And his reaction to me was very specific. He was like, "You're not ready to see me. You're not ready." And I was like, "Not ready? Ready for what?" I'm crying like, "What?" And he took me through this image, and the image was of the sun. I didn't understand what it was at the time. And it was this point of light that came out of the surface of the sun, and it kind of blasted off into space. And as it was moving through space out of the surface of the sun, this point of light split into maybe thousands or millions of other points of light. And I watched one of them, actually several of them, trailed off toward a place that I can only imagine as Earth. And so even in the moment of that, witnessing that, I kept saying, "What is this? What is this?" And he said 3 words to me: "Purify your body." And I wish I could say I did. I wish I could say I understood. I was like, I didn't though. I was just like, oh my God, that was amazing. And so that was honestly the beginning of this journey. That was in 2016. And a few months later, I met a person that was like, look, the reason why these things are happening to you is because you have a contract in this life to do this work. You're a psychic. And it was one of those moments in my life where somebody literally saw me for the first time and gave me a label that I never understood, yet was literally true. And so they kind of changed my life, if you want to get technical. Anyway, I'll stop there. But
When you saw them, do you feel like they were physically there or only partially coming through some kind of dimension? And
That's a smart question.
and let me add this, and you can answer both. Among all the questions you were asking, were you ever doubting the whole experience and saying, "Is this real?"
I think everybody doubts it. I think if you have experiences like that and the humanness of you doesn't come back later on and go, "Am I just crazy?" I think you know that's to me that's normal. What I noticed in those moments was that there was no room for a tangible thought. There was no room for a question and answer type of, "Hi, what are you doing? This is amazing," type of an experience. It's as if every channel and every passageway and every chakra is on fire and lit up and alive in a way that doesn't make sense, I think, for people in this world that might not have had that experience, which in some cases, just hearing that phrase is meaningless because I think for most of us, we have the potential to have those experiences in this life. And so I would say for me, there was no tangible frequency of thought through which I could even form a concrete kind of conversation. It was more of the realm of feeling. It was like a transmission. And then the other part of your question, do I think they were in like physically in the room? That's very, very smart. What I've come to understand in the years since is that there are many different layers and ways in which multidimensional energy will materialize. And I think one of the most common ones is where we will enter somewhat of a fourth density framework, meaning you'll perceive that you're in the same room that you're in a physical space, and you'll be experiencing as that, but it's still what we would call the astral version of that. I think that's likely. And then at the same time, I do also leave room for the idea that there was a physical manifestation because it does happen at times. Although I do believe that it's far less common than a lot of a lot of us are led to, think it is. And so I don't know if that answers your question, but it's very, very smart.
Do you think that these beings and the boy are members of your star family or soul tribe?
I would like to think so. I believe that the mantis form that appeared to me that day is actually a being that called itself Ezekiel. Because it's good that we're talking about this. I talk about this in my book as well. But you know how you'll talk about experiences and little pieces of it come back? That was one tangible piece of information that I received from him. Kept saying, like, "What is this? Who are you? What is this?" And it said, "Ezekiel, Ezekiel, brother Ezekiel." Now, that's neither here nor there, and some may say that's a creation of the mind. And I'm one of those people that after all these years, I think, even if it was, let's say even if it was, let's say even at, age 40, this person seemed to have a psychotic break that made him think he was experiencing aliens in his room when in reality he was just psycho. And even if that was the case, the changes and the work and the modalities that we've picked up and the techniques that have come to us since then has gone so far beyond the realm of imagination that I now know something took place. And so who knows, maybe after we die, we get like a great, like a reveal and they're like, "Here's what it really was." But that's a smart question. I would like to think both.
Well, what things have happened that have gone beyond the realms of imagination?
Oh man. Well, there is an energetic modality that we use here we go, energy clearing that helps us remove buildup from certain areas in the body, areas that lead us to feelings of great disharmony, dissatisfaction, and all kinds of difficulties that we encounter as human beings. Over the course of my contact with these beings, later on, they put me in touch, or I believe we're sort of a conduit to a group of very tall, dark-skinned, shamanic type of what I believe to be humanoid aliens. I think they're one of the most commonly occurring forces that are working with humans right now, but they're rarely ever seen. And in the process of that, we were given essentially part of a language that I was shown was used on Earth most recently in what we would call a Lemurian area. So it's very, very ancient to us. But what it essentially is a language that creates dilation of energy centers in the body. Just like your eyes dilate in the dark, energy centers will dilate in the body. And one of the tools that we were given from these experiences was the seeding points. What I mean by seeding points is the sort of basis of a language that is physically spoken and also internally spoken. And just in the session work that I've done since then, which has been, it's always weird to kind of, say this, but over 5,000 individual sessions since that time, we've learned that they do work beyond a shadow of a doubt. There is an effect that takes place. Now, it varies based upon the person. Some people take to it very, very easily. Other people don't, but it's essentially like learning a language. As long as you practice it, you can learn to create great change within the energy bodies of, yourself and those you work with one kind of mission. In the end, what it really does is open up your psychic abilities. I mean, really, that's the process of chakra dilation. It opens us up to a whole bunch of different frequencies. And so,
Tell us how you had physical contact with this reptilian.
I was living in, this is the funnest part. I was living in the greater Los Angeles area at the time, and just kind of observing the madness of the current moment. And during this period, this sounds so silly, but I'm just going to go for it. I was doing a meditation laying on my bed one night. I think it was a Monday night. And within that period, a certain shaft of light opened up within our literal studio apartment in the Wilshire neighborhood. In the Wilshire neighborhood of Los Angeles. A literal column of light opened up in that space, and I became paralyzed. My wife was about, I would say, 6 feet away from me, laying against the wall. She was also a part of this experience, and both of us were paralyzed in that moment. And what I observed was, in front of me, a column of light appeared, and essentially a reptilian form began to take shape in that. In those moments, as I realized that I was literally paralyzed, I watched this being come in. I would imagine, or not imagine, I would describe that most of us would imagine it like a dinosaur being mixed with a very, very traditional reptilian, but very much more dragon-like. There was a lot of sort of appendages and sort of just things like adorned upon the body. And he was even wearing some form of like a robe, or this almost like a ceremonial kind of garb that he was wearing at the time. And I was laying there on this bed, and this being came in and completely paralyzed me, and somehow was able to pick me up and sort of turn me over. They did like an examination, very much like people will do when we pull an animal out of the ocean. They'll sort of tag it and they'll pull it out, and they kind of hold it and like flip it over. And that was literally what I experienced. This being picked me up, he turned me over, he lifted up my arms, he moved my head back and forth. And in the process of that, I realized once again, like I was saying with these mantis beings, I could not form a thought. Only the difference with the reptilian being was that there was like this brick wall around me where I could not speak, I could not move my mind past a certain point. I could not feel fear. I could not feel anything. It was like everything within me had been paused and blocked, and I was completely paralyzed. And he just kind of turned me over. And when he brought me up to his face, it was like I was allowed to speak, or I was allowed to think. And I say that I was allowed because it was like when I came up to this being's face, I noticed his eyes were doing this thing where they were like morphing and changing and like changing shape, and they would turn like diagonal for a second, and then they would turn into like squares, and they would like move in this weird thing. And as that was happening, I was then able to suddenly think, and I was like, what is this? Who are you? Is this real? What's happening? And the message that I got from this being was, touch me and tell me if I'm real. And in that moment, my hand came out. It's important for me to mention this because this was not a thing where I was like, yes, I'm going to touch this being. It was nothing like that. It was like I watched my hand reach up, and I touched the side of its face and like the underside of its neck. And in the process of me making contact with that being, like there was some sort of a transfer of energy. It was like in that moment, I could see the caste system on its planet. I could see groups of beings. I could see literal like family networks. I could even see pet or pet-like creatures that this race was holding on to, or like keeping in their sort of family networks. And it was as if there was a transference, or I know this is such a cheesy term, a mind meld of sorts, because at the same time, I watched him looking at every scene from my early life. I mean, weird abuses that I had had, experiences that I had had, you know what I mean? Stuff that had been buried within my psyche for so long. It was like I watched it play back, and at the same time, I watched them in their world. And honestly, it was very frightening. I can tell you a little bit about what I perceived. Number one, they're from a timeline that's very, very close to Earth. It's very, very close, and they're actually from a physical, literal constellation. It's called Telescopia. You guys can look it up. You can find it out there, Telescopia constellation. But anyway, they're a reptilian group that's very, very closely kind of, they're not too far from our vibration, very, very physical, flesh and blood. And what they do is they scan the cosmos, if you want to call it that, for other beings that they've been connected as or at to or have incarnated as on their planet in other life cycles. And so I can only assume, because this was not shown to me specifically, that I may have been one of those beings, because in the process of connecting with it, like I said, I saw all kinds of stuff. I did get to watch a very strange ritual that they take place in, which I feel that I was meant to see it, but it was a very gruesome thing where they would actually ritually unalive certain members of their tribe. I'm using, proper terms, for the internet. And it was a great honor. I got to watch that in a very strange and gruesome way. They showed us what they did with, weak and sick members of their tribes and how they would cull them. And they even showed how their three castes, they had one was a warrior caste, one was a worker caste, and one was like a sort of priest caste, like they would sort of explore. And I was in contact with the priest caste. And what they would do is they would actually sit in these circles, and they have these sort of like crystals or these objects that they would vibrate with their mind. And as they would raise it up in the air, it would create a literal screen. And it was as if they were literally just scanning through channels, just, finding people, scanning and scanning and scanning. And one day they stopped on me. And so, just to kind of really quickly wrap up that story, after that experience, my life took a very, very strange change. It took a real weird turn. I started working out. It was like I got hyper aggressive. It was not a really good thing. It had both good sides and bad sides, but it had a profound change on me. And so, anyway, I will pause there because I know that's quite a bit.
You mentioned that your wife was paralyzed as well. Did she
Yeah.
witness all of this?
I believe that she has partial recollection of that experience. And I suppose I wish she's in the other room. We could actually ask her if she was here. I believe that she has a partial recollection of that experience, maybe not in as detailed as I did. However, that is my understanding. And there had been other kind of, well, if you want to call it group experiences that I had been on alongside hers as well, actually, in the past. And so it is something that we had shared previously, but I should ask her again. I am curious what she remembers specifically.
Since these two contact events, have you had continued contact with either or any of these beings?
The reptilian presence, I believe, has come and gone at certain stages. There's people that I've worked with, and there have been client sessions that I've done since then in which they have made themselves known on a number of different occasions. In some cases, visually, where I'll actually see what I would call the astral kind of form of these beings. And so I would say they're from a operative perspective, I would say the reptilian energy is still very, very much present with me. And I think part of that is because one of my overall missions in what I do is partially to help reacclimate current humanity with their understandings of reptilian energy and help people understand that there are many different forms of it. There's positive, there's negative. The majority of the ones that own the earth at this time are really not our friends, but that's a conversation for a whole other time. The mantis beings, I noticed, stopped coming around after we left Los Angeles. When I moved out of Los Angeles, they just didn't really come around that much. There has, however, been a group, like I mentioned earlier, of what I call tall, very dark-skinned shamanic humanoid beings that I believe when I feel into the constant presences that guide me and connect with me and the work that I do with clients, I feel that they are still very, very much present. However, the most common form, I would say, are the guides and the energies that come along with the people that I work with. And so that could quite literally be anyone and anything, everything down to, light beings and, like the laundry list of stuff that we talk about on YouTube, all the way down to biblical demons, which are literally real and they're out there too. You know what I mean? They show up every once in a while. So, yeah.
Do you think everyone is psychic? They just need to develop their abilities?
I am absolutely positive that if you are in what I call ensouled human, and not everyone on earth has a soul, but for those of us that have souls, I believe that we are living in a time on earth and you are living in a lifetime, an incarnational cycle where you have a very particular set of skills. It's sort of like in a video game, where we will choose a character and we'll come in and, play this game. And for a lot of us, there's all these secret, things, or there's these, secret cheat codes or these hacks that we can use. And I think one of the native settings of the human body is that we are highly intuitive, highly telepathic. We have the ability to move matter with our minds and change things within another person's body, just through the power of our thought. And I think everyone has an ability in that area. I think kind of like people that maybe will play music, some of us will learn how to play a few chords on a guitar. Others will start a band and make that your whole career. You know what I mean? I guess I was one of those people where that was going to be literally what I did in this life. But honestly, if you are one of the people that hears my voice, you have an ability and you are living in a life cycle right now where if you are willing to devote yourself to the process of opening that up in a very individualistic way, which will probably look a lot different than the way a lot of, people on YouTube do it. You have an ability to open up very, very unique traits and skills. And I think that, anyway, I could go on and on about it, but yes, literally every one of us has an ability.
You said that ensouled people can do this. The people that don't have souls, are those the same thing as NPCs like Dolores Cannon talks about?
I think in a lot of ways, yes. However, to make it even more confusing, what I've observed in the years since learning about that phenomenon is there are many different varying stages of what we would call soul loss or even soul retrieval. And I think one of just the native aspects of living on a third density plane is that there will be a number of beings that will incarnate as somewhat containers. You know what I mean? They'll just be beings that are here, to exist. And it's funny because in the process of placing our focus and energy upon those beings, we actually have the ability to kind of add more consciousness into their life cycle. And so it's kind of a temporary stage that I think certain beings come in as. But to make it even crazier, even if you want to go that direction, even beings that do not currently have an ensouled human makeup will have also a very particular intuitive ability. It's sort of native to the human physical body. Like when we get certain things in harmony, and especially when we open up certain doorways in the body, we begin to perceive energy and truth and just our world very differently. And I guess the kicker about it all is that maybe I shouldn't say this, but I will. It doesn't matter if you're good or evil. These are things that are like available to everyone.
Can you give us some basic tips to be able to recognize and trust our psychic gifts?
Absolutely. I think first of all, one of the most common ones that comes in probably when we're children is I would say it's the most common and the first activating psychic sense that happens for most of us. That is claircognizance. Claircognizance for most people begins in early childhood, sometimes, usually between the years 8 and 12 years old. And everyone's had this feeling. It's that moment where you get that strange feeling in your gut. You notice something come over you, you'll feel an emotion or a sense or something like that. And I would say the first stage is acknowledge it. Acknowledge that there is some form of a feeling or a signal that your body's receiving, even if you don't have any idea what that is. Claircognizance, I think, shows up very, very early on in people because it's one of our body's native survival kind of intuitive abilities. That's why it shows up when we're really, really young. But it's going to be a little bit different for every person. I always say the first step is giving yourself permission, which sounds crazy for some people. They're like, what do you mean? You got to give yourself, authorization. Yes, literally, we have to give ourselves permission to begin to understand that we have an ability to perceive non-physical energy, the world of spirit, to begin to know things that we could not have learned. You know what I mean? That's I think the biggest step for people. And when it comes to intuitive development, it's one of those things where like whether you think you can or you can't, you're right. And so there's a lot of deep programming that takes place in the start. I would actually say that is the first gateway of what I call true intuitive activation. The very first gateway is detox and deprogramming.
What are astral parasites?
Good question. Astral parasites, I think, are probably one of the most common forms of what we want, if you want to call it interference energy. And I guess the fun thing about it is that based on who you follow, which practitioners you go to, based on who you turn to, an astral parasite is going to be a completely different thing, you know, based on who you're talking to. What I've noticed over the years is that one of the number one ways in which certain things like entity attachment or parasitic interaction that's non-physically based will take place in the body is through the chakras and the meridians. And I had some experiences early on, like we were talking earlier, where I had been like blown open on such a level that there were days when I could feel and sense and literally, it sounds crazy, I could almost smell every single channel in the body. And one of the things I was able to pick up very early on was that when it comes to parasitic infestation in the body, there's an entirely non-physical element of it. And it usually plays along with emotions and behaviors and a whole bunch of other things, but they tend to affect us within our meridian body. Whereas, well, also within the chakra system as well. But usually, when I notice buildup within the meridian body, when I notice sort of parasitic attachment there, it'll show up as, you know, negative thought forms. In many cases, those end up being energetic maladies. And so, anyway, I don't know if that answers your question, but yeah.
You have a book called Remember Your Mission. What if you're not crazy? How did you come up with that title?
Because I honestly thought I was crazy when this started. In 2015, when this whole journey, you know, kicked off, like I said, I was knee deep in, you know, nuts and bolts, you know, UFO, you know, very unspiritual, completely toxified. I was in just regular old third density, you know, physicality. And I literally thought I was losing my mind for 2 years. I walked around my hometown talking to animals, crying randomly. You know, I was hiding in my backyard for days, just doing, you know, like qigong, you know, just I was the most isolated, pitiful version of myself. And in that process, I mean, I had to come to terms with the fact that I was not losing my mind. There was something literally real that was happening to me at that stage. And so when I started to write this book, I realized that, you know, really one of my missions in this life was to help people figure out what it is they're doing here and why they came here and the abilities that they have when they came in. And to realize that, you know, we are not helpless, crazy, distorted beings, that there's some form of a reason why this was happening. And I think for me, it had to be very, very, it had to be insane. I had to go crazy for a while in order to figure out that I had a greater mission. And so that's honestly why I called it that, because I lived 2 years completely mad. And here we are on the other side of it. And now this is literally all we do. And so, you know.
Well, what is the biggest takeaway someone should get from reading your book?
I think that if there's anything that I want people to learn from me or that book, it's that you came here with an ability. You came here with a power, that there's a whole other set of roles or experiences for you in this life. And I think that we as humans get pigeonholed and stuck into stages of stagnancy, into giving our power away, into remaining small and kind of weak. And I think that when I kind of look at the overall mission, I would want to be the champion of those who have never been seen, who are never acknowledged, those weirdos that were on the corners of the room who never really, really got a chance. And so if you're one of those people out there, I would say that this is somewhat of a manual, literally a manual as to how do I begin opening up these abilities for myself. And so I'll leave it there, but yeah, that's literally what it is.
Have you ever seen nuts and bolts UFOs in waking life, like outside in your driveway or something?
I have not. I have not. I have seen the after effects of such things, meaning I have noticed the energy and the feeling around it. I've seen a lot of stuff in the skies, but I have never seen it. I have never I've never seen a craft waiting for me outside of my house. I will say though, I did wake up from a trance a few times standing in my underwear on the back step of my house, wondering how did I even get there? So I will say that happened, but no, I did not get to see it. So
After watching this podcast, people may want to reach out to you and ask you questions. Are you open to that?
absolutely. This work is literally the only thing I do. You guys can find me over on rememberyourmission.com. And so, yeah, just send me an email through that.
What else are you working on that you want people to know about?
Let's see. Currently, right now, we have a lot of stuff going on. Beginning, I think, May 18th, we have a chakra class coming up. For those of you guys out there that have been looking for an experience through which you can begin to learn how to do energy work, free from the confines of ascended masters or the overall milieu of starseed delusion, it's a very, very powerful and attainable process that anyone can go through. And so that's beginning in late May. You guys can find it over on Remember Your Mission. And then me and my wife do a Patreon group called the Blue Flame Collective, which has met every month for 5 years. Literally, we've been doing this every month for 5 years, and that's a really good place for people that want to become acclimated with what real professional psychic work looks like. We do a group every month where everybody that shows up gets a reading. And then lastly, we do have a really cool conference coming up. It's the Full Disclosure Now conference coming up in St. Petersburg, Florida. It is July, I believe it's the 12th through the 15th. And so that I think it's the only physical event that I will be doing this year. And so if you want to meet us, if you want to get an in-person session, if you want to see an incredible amount of speakers and all kinds of wild experiencers, you can also find us there. So yeah, that's pretty much it for now.
Will you be there each day or just one day?
Oh yeah, we'll be there the whole time. I'll be doing sessions while I'm there. I think I will be speaking on one of the days. My wife and Nora will be there as well, also doing sessions. And usually we just hang out for the whole thing. Like we'll probably get a hotel room and just hang out with everyone. So yeah, we will be there.
In your book, you write about the 4 gateways of intuitive activation. What are those?
Oh man. Okay, you ready? Here we go. The 4 gateways of intuitive activation. Number 1, detox and deprogramming. That's the stage where we remove the heavy chemical buildup from the body and begin to deprogram our ideas about what is true and what is not, about who we are and who we aren't. It's much more about mental programming than it is anything else. But that's stage 1, where we clear up the physical sort of fish tank, if you want to call it that. Stage 2 is divination. That is the stage where an individual begins to develop a language through which they can begin to speak with spirit. Some people begin to read tarot at that stage. Other people, find other methods. I believe that is one of the most powerful and useful things any true seeker can ever do. We need to develop a language with which we can speak to spirit. So that's gateway number 2. Gateway number 3 is energy body management. That's where we become our own healer. We start to learn what are chakras, what are the meridians, what are the psychosocial qualities of my organ, what are the organs, what are these strange layers of emotions that exist around the organs, and how do I begin to clear those up? How do I strengthen those? That's the stage where we begin to learn everything about what's inside, your vehicle, so to speak. I think that's probably the most empowering stage because that's where it really puts the power in your hands. And then lastly, probably the most important gateway of all is cultivation. That is the one that the majority of people never take into account. And that's why you see a lot of people that do this work rise and fall. They start out really strong and they do a bunch of work on people. And then after 2 or 3 years, something fades and they cannot maintain it. One of the reasons for that is that we need to cultivate the life force energy within our body. And so the 4th gateway is learning how to remain healthy, how to remain sane, how to keep the body intact. You know what I mean? How to not go crazy during this work. Because when you really step into doing this type of work on a full-time basis, there's a number of hazards and things that no one ever tells you about, all kinds of costs and sort of things that you have to deal with in doing this work. And so even for people that are just starting it out, that's the one that will give you the ability to keep going when everyone else has failed and is gone. And so that's the 4th one, cultivation.
If people want to find out more about your book, should they go to a website or Amazon?
Oh yeah, you can find it on Amazon. It's called Remember Your Mission. What if you're not crazy? What if you're psychic? So, but yeah, you can find it over there really, really easily.
Before we finish up, can you leave us with a last positive message?
Absolutely. I think that 2025 is going to be one of the greatest gateways for most of the people that are cognizantly aware of what's happening on Earth, those that are willing to challenge themselves and to step into new territory emotionally. What I mean is those who are willing to face what is still left within their life from their previous years of trying to understand who and what you are. As we go through 2025, a lot of the reasons for that are going to become much more clear. And I think that this year gives us a gateway into empowerment and clarity in ways that a lot of us have been waiting decades for. And so I just say, do not give up. You are not a victim to these times. You have an ability, you have a power. And honestly, I think this is the greatest time we could have ever chosen to be on Earth. And so, anyway, that's it. Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you for your message and thank you for being my guest.
Thank you. It's an honor.
Thanks for watching the JeffMara podcast. I really appreciate you. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. And if you do, there are loyalty badges and other perks depending on your level of membership. All you need to do is click the join button underneath the video to find out more. Thank you for your support.